This is the place for history on KY3, and we're joined today by Katie Seal. Katie, you're going to talk to me and the rest of us about. I've grown up in Missouri. I've lived in Springfield for many years now, and Phelps County is part of our what we consider our viewing area. And I've never heard of this. Some people call it the Pyramid in Phelps County. Others call it the Blue Pyramid. So what is this thing that seems to be a bit of a mystery?
Yeah, so similar to you, I grew up in Southwest Missouri. I actually moved up here to work with State Historical Society in 2017. And then I worked here in Phelps County in Rolla for actually several years before just a very off-handed comment and someone mentions like, oh yeah, and the that pyramid out towards St. James and wanted to continue. I was like, wait, no. I need you to come back and tell me what this is. So a lot of locals kind of knew that it existed, but it wasn't a huge thing, I guess, locally. Like, oh yeah, there was just a pyramid and a group that lived out on some property just south of St. James, but I had never heard of it. And it's in recent history. They were here in the 1970s, but was never anything I had come across. So it was, I guess, kind of formally known as Yahweh City. So this was a little settlement established by Joseph Jeffers, or Joe Jeffers is kind of what he goes by in his later years. It looks like they bought the property probably about 1971. It's start construction on the pyramid, which was initially a kind of a sky blue color. In later years, I guess it gets repainted into like an orange color. There's not really information as to why the change in color, but it was blue for most of its period. And that goes up in about 1973. And then this group is there up through, I believe, 1978.
So the man behind this, pardon the appearance by my dog here.
That's the best thing about Zoom.
This is the best thing. She wanted to make an appearance. Uh, the man behind this, he has quite a checkered past. Tell me a little bit about Jeffers and his past.
Yeah, so Jeffers is born actually about 1899 in Alabama. He's ordained as a Baptist minister around World War One. Actually goes to Seminary Hill in Texas in the 1920s, and for the first part of his career, is just kind of your everyday Baptist evangelical minister throughout Texas. He sets up a church in Arkansas in the 1930s, and I think this is where he starts some of his notoriety, some of his infamous past really starts coming to light in the news media as there is quite the dust up between him and the pastor of the church that he started. So he starts the church in Arkansas and goes back to Texas. But then he ends up coming back to Arkansas wanting to take the church back over and be in leadership, but the current pastor refuses. So there is a legal battle, but then there's also a shooting on the courthouse lawn after the decision's made. National Guards called in. There's, riots and fights between the two factions. And it ends up with the Arkansas pastor maintaining control of the church and Jeffers then leaving at that point. And from then, he really kind of bounces around the country. It's also in Arkansas that you start seeing a lot more of his, I guess, ideology starting to come into play in some of the talks he gives and the when he's preaching, he does a lot of prophesying at this point, talking about the end of the world. He knows when it's going to happen, how it's going to happen. And that kind of changes over time as to who's going to bring about the end of the world. As world events happen, it turns into the Russians at a later period, Koreans, whoever usually the United States happens to be in conflict with during that time period.
So with these proclamations, is he starting to gain a following?
He really is, and it's I would say in the 1940s where he really
Mm.
starts to get his big draw of people. At that time, so he's in Florida for a little while, but then he ends up in Los Angeles, and he's drawing crowds. He's the newspapers are reporting he's having several thousand in person. He starts a company. It kind of varies. It's usually Kingdom Voice Incorporated or LLC. He has several iterations of this particular business portion of his of what he does, and he starts putting out publications. So he's getting followers. He's getting people sending him money to then send them his publications. He's having what he's calling donations. The government and the IRS disagree with him later on as to those being
Yeah.
donated contributions to him, which does get him in trouble eventually. Um, but actually, the 1940s is, and because he's drawing these larger crowds and he's so close to a military base at this point, it gets him on the FBI's radar actually at that point.
Mm.
Several local individuals, there's a few rabbis that actually write to the FBI saying, this guy is saying some really wild things. He really shows his prejudice and his racism during this time to various groups. But what kind of keeps him from actually getting in trouble with the FBI is that he's never pro-German during this time. Like we're right in the middle of World War II, so he's never pro-Hitler or pro-German. He's anti every other group or minority. It seems like, um, but he's very much a leader of himself. Like he's not going to be following anybody else at this point. He
Mm.
actually says that yes, United States is going to fall, but it's not necessarily going to be to Germany, but there's going to be a new world order, and he's going to be in charge of at least a part of this new world that's going to come out of whatever world ending scenario that he sees.
He actually goes to jail, but not over
Mhm.
what he's saying. Is that correct?
Correct. Yes. So he actually, so there's a lot. There
It gets complicated, right?
it gets complicated. Like there's several cases tried to be made against him, but he never quite crosses the line. Like he's definitely scamming people. He's definitely kind of on that fence, but they can't ever really quite pin a crime until after he divorces his third wife. He actually steals, so she got the car in the divorce,
Mm.
and he didn't think that was right. So he actually ends up going back and stealing the car from his ex-wife and is caught because of that. So he goes to jail because he stole the car from his ex-wife and ends up spending some time in prison. Is let out, but then ends up getting caught in kind of some mail fraud scams and ends up going back to prison. So that's where he kind of spends some of the 1950s is actually in jail at that period.
So how does he wind up in Phelps County,
Mhm.
in the St. James area?
So according to Jeffers himself, we can, I guess, blame Harry Truman for this.
Oh.
So Jeffers is quoted as having said, and again, he also served as a medium. According to him, he could also speak to the spirits of past world leaders. He could talk to Churchill, Truman. He does make claims at one point that he was actually Truman's pastor while Truman was in the White House. There's no evidence of him actually being in
Yeah.
Washington, D.C. at the same time as Harry Truman was in office. So it's very unclear as to whether he is claiming to have spoke to Truman while he was alive or if this is after he has passed. Um, but according to him, Truman is quoted as having said, Missouri is the center of everything, which, as a president from Missouri, is a believable statement. Maybe he said something very similar to that, during the course of his life. But For whatever reason, that statement stuck with Jeffers and drew him here. I wasn't able to find anything as to why Phelps County, why St.
Ah,
James in particular. I don't know if he had a follower in the area who had land, or if this land was just available and it had the amount of space he was looking for. I was never able to quite pin that down as to why exactly in Phelps County. Um, but yeah, and he kind of starts a little bit of a, I guess, a kind of a tour, a campaign. He actually has a model of the pyramid that he is proposing to build,
hmm.
and kind of tours around with that again, trying to incite followers, elicit more funds to be able to purchase the land and then also build the pyramid.
So why a pyramid? What is he telling people when he's out and about trying to raise money for this?
So for him at this stage in his life, he's very much gone into the pyramid power, which some of that kind of starts here in the 1960s and 70s. So he really runs with that, and he sees the pyramid as, because it's got kind of an opening at the top so that the light actually pours in. So it's got some transcendental properties here, greater healing, uh, food stays fresher longer. Like he's actually got, once they have the pyramid built, he has a bit of a, I guess, display or kind of museum space in the basement of it where he's got, grapes on display that have been there for, months and months, and they've never rotted away, and wine tastes better, like it ferments and is even more amazing than any other regular wine that you can find. So it actually, according to him, has quite a few different properties that it brings about for people who come to visit the pyramid.
So he gets this pyramid built,
Mhm.
and does he get people to come and believe the grapes are really there for months and months and not turning into raisins?
So he actually does have quite a number of followers that do follow him to Missouri. What I can determine, most of them are from out of state or people that have been following him for a while, but he does set up a kind of little community there. They had some trailers and homes where people lived. They even had like a chiropractor who came and lived on like the compound. So they built kind of their own little community. It's really interesting though to look at like the local newspapers for like Rolla and St. James, and the local people were just like, yeah, there's guys out in the woods, they've got a pyramid, and there's just, we're just gonna let them be them, which I think is very interesting and very Missouri, very Ozark, right? You're just,
Yeah, you do you.
you do you. There's guys out in the woods with a pyramid. It's fine. Just okay.
So how long are they out there in the woods and this pyramid community they call Yahweh City? How long is that active?
So they're out there until the late 1970s. And this is the point where kind of a lot of things culminate for Jeffers as far as him actually getting in trouble. So he had a longtime follower named Esther Price, who had actually been a follower, sending him money, subscribed to his publications for probably over 20 years. Um, but unfortunately, later in her life, unknown to her family, she's originally from Virginia. She actually comes to live at Yahweh City at the end of her life, and she passes away there. And then the community of Yahweh City actually returned her to Virginia where she's buried, but they never informed the family, one, that she had passed away or that they were returning her for burial.
Oh,
And
wow.
then also, the executors of her estate and the lawyer handling it were also members of Yahweh City. So
Hmm.
Jeffers and Yahweh City, Kingdom Voice, his company, end up with the entirety of her estate at this point. She had donated quite a bit over her lifetime, but the grand total ends up to be somewhere between $5 and $6 million dollars is what ends up with in Jeffers' hands. And so it's several months later that the family is clued in to the fact that Esther has passed away, and they're like, no, her will said she had several charities that she supported. Um,
Hmm.
a couple different women's hospitals, different things, mostly there in Virginia. It's like nothing went to any of these causes that she has supported for years. And they're like, well, she changed her will conveniently that last year of her life while she was living in Yahweh City to give everything to Jeffers and Kingdom Voice. So that goes to court. During the course of this, also, his fourth wife, Connie, leaves him and tries to divorce him. She also takes a lot of that money, of the millions of dollars that Esther had, or that had been given to Jeffers. Her claim is that she's trying to keep him. Apparently, he wanted to try and run for president in the next election. So she's like, I'm trying to prevent that from happening. And so she kind of emptied the accounts as she files for divorce. So he's now kind of hurting for money. His wife's left him. One of his followers actually is caught attempting to hire someone to kill his ex-wife.
Oh, wow.
So he and I think three of his followers end up being arrested for conspiracy to commit murder. I think one of the more interesting parts is that he's arrested once he comes back to the States. So him and a couple of his followers actually travel down to Florida, trying to find what they call a golden needle, which is hidden inside of a pyramid sunken off the coast in the Bermuda Triangle. It just it builds. His story
It
just
does build.
yes.
It almost sounds like something somebody put in like a mini series or something.
He
What? A
he just
golden
this
needle,
whole
you said?
thing. Yes. So apparently there
Okay.
is a golden needle. There's a couple of them. One is in a pyramid that is submerged in the Bermuda Triangle. There's also one, I believe, like off the coast of Japan, and there's another one. Yeah. And he's trying to find one of these to be able to bring back to his own pyramid to, further elevate the powers of his pyramid, right? But unfortunately, he was unsuccessful in finding the golden needle, and upon returning to Missouri, is promptly arrested with a couple of his followers for trying to hire someone to kill his wife. So he wasn't there, and he's very quickly let off. They don't have any sort of evidence to actually say that he did tell his followers to try and hire someone. So he's let off there. And that's probably in the fall of 78. And then around this time, the IRS actually starts keening on to him, is like, hey, you haven't paid any personal taxes on your money. Also, your business Kingdom Voices hasn't paid taxes, or at least not to the level that they should have at this
Right.
point. So he's hit with some pretty hefty fines of having to pay back the IRS at this point, which leads to, they try to save face for a few months, saying, no, no, we're not leaving. We're all set up. This is the place um, where we're gonna meet the end times, because he's still prophesizing as to when the end of the world would come. But by early spring of 79, it's, they've had to call it quits. They have to sell the property, probably to pay back the IRS at this point.
Mm.
Some of the money is returned from his now fourth ex-wife, but she does keep some of it in the divorce settlement. But he's able to take that little bit of a nest egg and move on to the next thing. So he ends up, I think, in Texas and Florida for a little while before finally going to Arizona.
So what's up with this property now, all these years later? What 40, 50 years later?
Yeah, so very, very quickly, the property and everything on it goes up for sale, and several locals end up going together, and it's on the auction block, and they buy it. And I think in the true Ozark justice, the gentleman who purchased the land where the pyramid was ends up storing hay in the pyramid.
So the magical pyramid is for hay storage.
It becomes a hay barn for several months. And then within that first year, another local for reasons still unknown, actually does set the pyramid on fire. And of course, it's filled with hay. And as we know, with a hay fire, there's no putting that out. So it does burn to the ground, just leaving foundation. So within less than a year of Yahweh City and all of its inhabitants leaving, the pyramid is burned to the ground.
So the only way we know about it now is some of the pictures from the State Historical Society and you and your knowledge telling this story.
Yeah,
That's just amazing. And no wonder we don't hear about it because it's not there anymore.
it's not there. There's a few remnants of some foundation, and there's still, locals who were alive during that time, but there was not a lot of interaction between the local community and the followers of Jeffers that were out there. So yeah, it's just kind of one of the unique local stories that like people know about or they heard about as kids. But as far as most of his followers who had that knowledge, most of them ended up leaving and following him further on. So
Well, Katie, this has been fascinating. As someone who grew up in Missouri, as I mentioned, never heard of this, and I thank you for doing the research. It's one of the benefits of having the State Historical Society and historians working to keep our history alive, and and this is just an incredible story out of Phelps County.
yeah, it's one of the greatest joys of my work. At heart, I'm just a historian who loves doing research. So I find these, kind of amazing, truly unique Missouri stories that I get to kind of delve into. And with the resources we have here, with our collections in the newspapers, it's fascinating and it's a lot of fun to do.
All right, Katie, I look forward to talking to you again, finding out about the next mystery of Missouri.
Yeah, same here.
Thanks for joining us on The Place for History.
Thanks for having me.